Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The night was heavy with the scent of freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and the soft hum of quiet conversations. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the silverware on the table. The restaurant was busy, the low clink of glasses and quiet laughter filling the air. She focused on her work, trying to block out everything else, the constant swirl of customers, the never-ending orders, the constant hum of exhaustion settling in her bones. But then she saw him. She didn't notice him at first, just another well-dressed man with his wife, seated at a table in the corner. But then he shifted, and their eyes met. Caroline froze. She had seen this man before. She was sure of it. There was something about him, his sharp features, his cold stare, that was impossible to forget. But it couldn't be. She had only seen him once, years ago, and back then, it was under completely different circumstances. She couldn't even think about it. Couldn't remember it without the knot in her stomach tightening. The memory felt distant, like a bad dream she had long since buried. She had been so young, so naive. And yet, here he was. Standing right in front of her. She forced herself to look away, trying to push the feeling of dread that crept up her spine. She couldn't let herself think too much about it. Not here. Not now. But her hands, steady as they normally were, began to shake. Caroline glanced back at him, quickly, trying to seem casual, but the man was still watching her. His eyes never left her. And that unsettled her more than anything else. His wife, sitting across from him, seemed oblivious to the strange tension in the air. She was engaged in a conversation, her voice soft and animated, as she looked down at the menu in front of her, unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. But Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that the man across from her knew something she didn't. There was something dangerous about him, something in the way he watched her. His gaze was too intense, too knowing. She could feel the weight of his stare like a physical presence. And then, suddenly, he spoke. "Excuse me." The voice was smooth, almost too smooth. It didn't match the coldness in his eyes. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. She could have sworn she knew that voice. It was low, with a certain authority to it, the kind of voice that made people stop and listen. "Could you come here for a moment?" he asked again, his tone polite but firm. Caroline's heart began to pound in her chest. She took a deep breath and walked over, her feet dragging, her mind racing. As she moved closer to the table, she glanced briefly at the woman sitting across from him. She hadn't looked up once, but there was something off about her, too. Caroline couldn't put her finger on it, but it was there, a quiet discomfort radiating from her. But then her eyes shifted back to him. The man who had asked her to come over. He was looking at her, his eyes intense but unreadable. There was no warmth there, just cold curiosity. And something else. Something darker. "Yes, sir," Caroline said, trying to keep her voice steady. She smiled, though it felt forced. He tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving her face. "You don't remember me, do you?" Her pulse quickened. She felt her breath catch. She forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. Have we met?" The man didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her, his gaze growing more intense by the second. She could feel the weight of his stare, and it made her skin prickle. "No," he said slowly, almost with a hint of amusement. "I don't think you remember me." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I remember you. I remember everything. You changed my life, Caroline. But you probably don't even know it." Caroline's blood ran cold. Her heart skipped a beat. She felt a chill race up her spine. There was no way. There was no way this man could know her name, not unless. The words, "You changed my life," echoed in her mind, and the world around her seemed to slow down. A rush of memories she couldn't fully grasp rushed through her, bits and pieces of a past that she had locked away. Memories she didn't want to remember. I'm sorry," Caroline stammered, trying to force a calmness she didn't feel. "I think you have the wrong person." The man's eyes never wavered. "I don't think so," he said softly. "I know who you are. And I know what you did. You'll never forget me, not after tonight." Caroline's stomach churned, and she felt the color drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He sat back, his eyes gleaming, and his lips curled into a faint, almost sinister smile. "Oh, don't worry, Caroline. You'll find out soon enough. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just here to remind you of something." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. "You've been a part of my story, whether you know it or not." Her mind raced. What could he possibly mean? She started to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Her thoughts were scattered, trying to make sense of the strange encounter. But it felt like her brain wasn't working fast enough. The man wasn't finished. He pushed an envelope across the table toward her, and her eyes were drawn to it immediately. She didn't want to take it. She couldn't take it. Not from him. But her hand, as if on its own, reached out and grabbed it. The envelope was thick, heavy. Too heavy for such a small thing. She didn't dare open it in front of him, but she could feel it, the weight of whatever was inside pressing against her palm. "Don't worry," he said again, his voice almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret. "You'll find out what it means soon enough. And when you do, I think you'll be very surprised. It's time for you to remember, Caroline. It's time for you to face the truth." Caroline stood frozen, staring at the envelope, her fingers clenched tightly around it. The man sat back in his chair, glancing briefly at his wife before returning his gaze to her. The wife, still unaware of the exchange happening just a few feet away, continued to chat with the waiter, her voice oblivious to the growing tension in the air. Caroline's mind raced, trying to process everything. The man's words. The envelope. The way he looked at her, as if he knew something she didn't. How did he know my name? What does he want? She didn't know, but her instinct screamed at her that she needed to leave, needed to escape before whatever was happening here spiraled even further. But her legs felt like lead, and the weight of the envelope felt like a stone in her hand, anchoring her to the spot. "I'll be seeing you soon, Caroline," he said, his tone casual, almost final. "And trust me, when I do, you'll be ready to remember." Without waiting for a response, he turned his attention back to his wife, who was still unaware of the tension that had just exploded between them. Caroline didn't move. She could still feel the heat of the man's eyes on her, even though he was no longer looking at her. The sense of dread was overwhelming. Her heart raced in her chest as she took a step back, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to think. But one thing was certain. Her life had just changed. And there was no going back now. Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She stood in the back of the restaurant, her hands gripping the envelope like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her head buzzed, and her heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but she felt a deep sense of urgency. Something was closing in on her. The man, the billionaire who claimed she had changed his life, wasn't just another stranger. His words lingered in her mind, echoing through her thoughts. She had to know more, had to understand why he seemed so certain of who she was, and why, after all these years, he had decided to confront her now. She knew she had to get out of there, but she couldn't leave without opening the envelope. She could already feel the weight of it. It wasn't just paper, it was a message. The kind of message that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her past. Caroline glanced over her shoulder. The restaurant was still bustling, but the noise now felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. She was barely aware of the other waitstaff moving around her, of the customers laughing and talking. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart, the tension that pulled tight in her chest, and the soft rustle of the envelope as she slowly, almost hesitantly, peeled it open. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a thick sheet of paper. The letter was written in elegant, sharp handwriting, the ink dark and deliberate. As she read, the words seemed to blur and sharpen at the same time, making her head spin. Caroline. I hope you remember me. I trust you will. You must. It has been years, but I have never forgotten you. I have never forgotten the choices you made for me, the life you made me believe I could have. I've spent these years searching for you, hoping for a chance to speak with you, to finally repay what you gave me. The man who walked into your life all those years ago was not who he seemed. Neither was I. But you, Caroline, you were real. You were the catalyst. You are the key to everything I've built. But now, the time has come for you to know the truth. I owe you that. I'll be waiting for you at the address on the back of this letter. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. And don't forget, your decisions that day have led us to this moment. L. The letter dropped from her hands. She felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared at the final words. The address on the back of the letter seemed to mock her, pulling her into a place she didn't want to go. L. The initial burned into her mind, reminding her of the past she had tried to forget. It all came rushing back. The memories she had buried deep. The faces she'd pushed out of her thoughts. The fear that had once controlled her life. The shame. The choices that had altered everything. Caroline closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. Her mind swirled with questions. What did he mean by, "You changed my life"? What was he implying? Who was this man, really? She needed answers. And she knew she couldn't wait any longer. The hours after work felt like they dragged on forever. Caroline had barely been able to concentrate on anything as the words of the letter spun through her mind. The address was on the outskirts of town, in a quiet neighborhood that seemed almost too serene. There was something unsettling about it, like it was waiting for her. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. No one could know, not yet. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she had a sick feeling in her stomach that whatever it wasn't going to be easy. By the time she pulled up to the address, night had fallen, and the streetlights cast eerie shadows across the pavement. The house was grand, almost too grand for the neighborhood it was in. A sprawling mansion stood behind a tall gate, its dark windows staring back at her like eyes that had seen too much. Caroline's hands gripped the steering wheel, her pulse racing. Every instinct in her screamed to turn around, to leave this place and never come back. But she couldn't. She had to know. She had to understand why this man, L, was so desperate to make her remember. She stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, her steps heavy on the gravel. Driveway. The envelope was still in her pocket, and she could feel it pressing against her side, urging her to continue. When she reached the door, it swung open before she had a chance to knock. Caroline, the man's voice greeted her before she could even see his face. He stepped out from the shadows, his tall figure outlined by the dim light of the hallway. It was him. The billionaire. The man who had haunted her thoughts since the restaurant. His cold eyes locked onto hers, and that same unsettling smile tugged at his lips. "I knew you'd come," he said quietly, almost as if he had been expecting her all along. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Caroline felt her heart beat faster. She couldn't bring herself to speak. The words wouldn't come. She had so many questions, but they felt like they were stuck in her throat. "You've been part of this for so long," he continued, stepping aside to let her into the house. "But you didn't know." No one ever does, not until it's too late. Caroline hesitated, but she stepped inside. The house was as grand on the inside as it had appeared from the outside. Marble floors, grand chandeliers, expensive artwork lining the walls, everything about it screamed wealth. But it was cold. The air felt heavy, and the silence pressed in on her, making her skin crawl. The man led her through a long hallway, stopping in front of a large study. "We can talk in here," he said, opening the door. Caroline stepped inside, her mind racing. She tried to focus, tried to push past the fear and confusion that threatened to overwhelm her. But something about the room unsettled her, an old, dusty feeling, as if the place hadn't been used in years. The man walked over to a table and sat down, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. "You must have a lot of questions," he said, settling into the chair. "I'll try to answer them, though I can't promise it will make much sense right away." Caroline took a seat, her hands still shaking. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the man spoke again. "Do you remember the accident?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. The question hit her like a punch to the gut. Caroline's breath caught in her chest. The accident. It was the one thing she had tried so hard to forget. She nodded slowly, unwilling to speak the words aloud. "That night, the night that had altered everything. I was there," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "It was no accident, Caroline. It was all planned. I had a role in it, just as you did. You think it was just a random turn of events, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of something much bigger." Caroline's mind raced, trying to process the words. Planned? She couldn't understand what he was saying. Why was he telling her this now? What did he want from her? He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't remember everything, do you?" "I don't blame you. Most people can't. But I've spent years trying to find you. And now that I have, it's time for you to understand your role in all of this." Her heart pounded in her chest. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to reveal something that would change everything. "You will soon enough." The room felt colder now, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Caroline's pulse raced, her thoughts a chaotic mess. The man sitting across from her, the billionaire with the cold eyes and the haunted smile, had just opened a door she hadn't been ready to walk through. He wasn't talking about an accident in the way she'd imagined. She had been terrified, sure, of the night that had altered everything. But she thought that fear had been buried, locked away in the corner of her mind. She never expected it to be dragged out again like this. Never expected him, to come into her life again and twist everything she thought she knew about herself into something unrecognizable. The man leaned back in his chair, watching her as if he were waiting for her to process what he had just said. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. He wasn't going to offer her answers, that much was clear. She was going to have to pry them from him. "You keep saying we," Caroline finally managed to say, her voice shaky, but determined. "You say it was all planned. But what do you mean by that? What are you talking about?" The man's eyes softened just slightly, though the glint of calculation never fully left them. He tilted his head, studying her with an almost clinical detachment. "You really don't remember, do you?" he asked, his tone almost pitying, but still sharp. "You were a part of it, Caroline. You were the catalyst. You set things into motion, whether you intended to or not." Caroline clenched her fists in her lap, fighting back the panic rising in her chest. "I don't understand. I haven't done anything, at least, nothing that I remember being important." Her words were desperate, her mind scrambling for a reason, an explanation, but it was as though the man in front of her was offering nothing but riddles and shadows. He studied her for a long moment, and then, as if making a decision, he stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if every step carried weight that she could barely comprehend. He walked over to a large desk by the window, where a map of the city sprawled out in front of him, scattered with notes and red markings. The night of the accident wasn't just an accident, he began, his voice low but firm. It was a plan. A series of events that, if they had gone differently, would have changed everything. It was supposed to be a turning point, for you, for me, for the man who orchestrated it all. Caroline's mind swirled. Accident? She couldn't breathe. She thought she had moved past it. Thought she'd left it behind, forgotten the details that had haunted her for years. But they were right here, in front of her, staring her in the face. "Who are you, really?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you telling me this now?" He turned, his gaze darkening, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of emotion, anger, maybe? Or regret? It was gone in a flash, replaced by the cold mask of control. "I'm the one who found you when no one else could," he said simply. "I'm the one who's been watching from the shadows, waiting for you to remember. It's been a long time, Caroline, but everything has led up to this moment. You've been living your life, unaware of the strings that have been pulling you. But now, it's time to wake up." Caroline stood up, feeling the weight of the room closing in on her. "What do you want from me? Why drag me into this?" He smiled, but it was a cruel smile, the kind that made her blood run cold. "I want the truth. I want you to remember the role you played that night. Because until you do, we're both stuck. You and I. We can't move forward until you face the reality of what happened." She stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't remember, and I don't want to. Whatever it is, whatever you're talking about, I just want to go home." But the man's eyes never left hers. "You don't have a home anymore, Caroline. Not until you remember. You've been living a lie, and you've been a part of something much bigger than you understand. And if you refuse to face it, you're only going to make things worse. For both of us." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She hadn't expected him to be so cold, so detached. The man she had seen at the restaurant, the one who had smiled at her like he knew everything, he was just a part of this puzzle, too. A man who had been waiting for her to wake up, to remember. She looked around the room, as if searching for something to hold on to. The old walls. The dark furniture. The map, with its red marks and notes, nothing felt real anymore. It was as if her whole life had been a lie. Every choice, every step she had taken to rebuild herself, every moment she had tried to move forward, had it all been for nothing? "I'm not part of your game," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished it had. "I don't know what happened back then, and I don't care. I don't need to know." His smile widened, and this time, it was full of something darker. Something that sent a chill running through her veins. "You'll care soon enough. Everyone has a part to play. And you, Caroline, you're at the center of it all." She recoiled, her body instinctively stepping back. "What are you talking about?" He walked toward her, his steps measured, each one echoing in the silence of the room. The night of the accident was just the beginning. It was supposed to break you, to push you into something bigger. A life you couldn't even imagine. But you survived. And that's what I need to understand. How did you survive? How did you manage to slip through the cracks when the rest of us were trapped? Caroline felt dizzy. Her mind was whirling. She couldn't breathe. How did I survive? The man stopped in front of her, leaning in closer, his breath brushing against her skin. "You may not remember, but I do. And I know you're not the same person you were before. You've become something else, stronger, more resilient. I've been watching you, Caroline. Watching your every move. You're a part of something much bigger, and I need to know why." Caroline didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could take another second of this. She didn't know how much longer she could pretend she wasn't terrified. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want any of this. I just want to go home." He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, before he finally spoke. "You can't go home. Not yet. Not until you face what's coming." The words made her stomach churn. "What's coming?" she asked, barely able to force the words past her lips. His gaze sharpened. "The truth. The truth about who you really are. Who we really are." She stepped back again, feeling the weight of the room pushing against her. "No more games. I just want answers. Now." He nodded, almost as if he had been expecting her to say that. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "Then I'll show you everything. But know this, once you see what's hidden, you can never go back." Caroline swallowed hard, her body trembling. She knew she couldn't back out now. Not after everything. Whatever was coming, she was in it now. There was no turning back. The man turned and walked toward the desk again, grabbing a file from the stack of papers. He opened it, and as he did, Caroline saw something that made her blood run cold, a photograph of herself. A photograph from the past, from the night she had tried to forget. "I'm going to show you the rest of the story," he said quietly. "And then you'll understand everything." Caroline stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know. But as she looked at the photograph, she realized something that stopped her cold. She wasn't just in the photograph. She was the one holding the knife. The photograph felt like a weight that pressed against Caroline's chest, its reality sinking into her bones. She was holding the knife. The same knife that, all those years ago, had been part of the accident, a moment she had tried so desperately to forget. But now, it was all coming back. The fragments of her past that she thought she had buried deep were resurfacing, and there was no escaping it. The man, as he had introduced himself, watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her face. His calm demeanor only served to heighten the tension in the room. Caroline's hands were shaking. She wanted to look away, to deny what was in front of her, but she couldn't. The truth was starting to tear through the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself. "Do you remember now?" he asked, his voice low, almost coaxing. "Do you remember what you did?" Caroline swallowed hard. She had to face it. She couldn't pretend anymore. The image in front of her, the knife, the accident, was part of something much bigger than she had ever realized. She thought back to that night, the one that had changed everything. The night she had tried to forget. But the pieces didn't fit. They never had. There was something missing. Something important. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't remember." His eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then he stepped closer to her, closing the distance between them. "You don't remember what you did that night, Caroline. But I do. And I've been waiting for you to remember, because I knew the moment you did, you'd understand." The man's presence seemed to fill the room, making it feel smaller, more oppressive. Caroline tried to take a step back, but the walls of the study seemed to close in on her. There was no escaping the truth now. "You were there, Caroline," he continued, his voice growing more intense. "You were the one who made the choice that night. You made the decision that changed everything. You held that knife, and you used it. And when you did, you sealed your fate and mine." Caroline's heart raced in her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but she couldn't find the words. She didn't want to know what he was suggesting. But deep down, she knew it was true. The fear she had buried so long ago was creeping back into her veins, reminding her that she wasn't as safe as she had hoped. The man's eyes searched hers, as if waiting for her to comprehend the gravity of his words. He paused, letting the silence stretch between them before continuing. The man you think you're running from, the one you've tried to forget, he's not gone. He's never been gone. You may have moved on, you may have convinced yourself that you were safe, but you weren't. You were never safe. You're part of something much bigger than you ever realized. Caroline took a deep breath, her thoughts spinning. The man's words were like a heavy fog clouding her mind. She tried to focus, tried to make sense of everything he was saying, but it was all too much. She had spent years pretending that night had never happened. Pretending that the accident was just a tragic mistake, a misunderstanding. But now, the truth was slamming into her like a freight train. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Waiting for the moment when you could see everything clearly. I knew that once you remembered, you'd understand." The man turned his back to her for a moment, walking over to a bookshelf that ran along one wall of the study. His fingers trailed along the spines of the books before he pulled one out, a thick, leather-bound volume. He turned, holding it up for her to see. "This," he said, his voice almost reverent, "is the key. It's the truth about everything. The truth about what happened that night, about the people involved, about what you've been running from all these years." He set the book down on the table in front of her, its cover marked with a symbol Caroline didn't recognize. Her eyes flickered from the book to the man, then back to the book again. "You need to understand, Caroline," he said softly. "You were never just an innocent bystander. You weren't just the waitress who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than you ever realized. And now, you have a choice." Caroline stood still, her mind racing. A choice? What choice did she have? She had no control over this. No control over the past. She had spent years building a life, hiding from what happened, running from the fear. But now, the past was demanding that she face it. "You can either walk away," the man said, his voice low but insistent. "Or you can face the truth. The truth that has been following you all this time. The truth that you can no longer outrun." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Caroline didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. She was trapped in a web of lies, deceit, and fear that she had never asked to be a part of. But it was too late now. The choice was no longer hers. "Tell me the truth," Caroline said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Tell me what happened that night." The man nodded slowly, his expression softening just slightly. "It all started long before the accident. You were always meant to be part of this, Caroline. You were always meant to play a role in something bigger. The man you were involved with, the one you think of as your past, he was a part of the plan, too. And so were you." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "That night, the one you can't remember, the night of the accident, wasn't an accident at all. It was orchestrated. A trap designed to bring us all to the same point. A turning point. A moment when everything could change." Caroline's mind spun. She wanted to scream, to tell him to stop. But there was no stopping now. The truth was pouring out of him, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. "The knife," he said, "was meant to symbolize something. Power. Control. The ability to make a choice that would determine everything. You held the knife, Caroline. And when you made that decision, when you acted, you became part of something bigger than yourself." He stepped closer to her, his eyes dark with intensity. "And now, you're at the center of it. You always were." Caroline couldn't breathe. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. She was trapped. There was no escaping the truth anymore. She had been part of this all along. "I never asked for this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I know. But sometimes, the past has a way of catching up with us. No matter how hard we try to run. Caroline closed her eyes, her thoughts spinning. She had spent so many years trying to escape, trying to forget. But now, she understood. There was no escaping her past. It was a part of her, and it always would be. For better or for worse. The man turned to the desk, picking up the file with the photograph of her holding the knife. This, he said quietly, is where it all started. And this, he added, holding up the book, is where it ends. Caroline stepped forward, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just learned. The truth was more than she had bargained for. But in the end, it was the only thing that could set her free.